Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about the mass hysteria iceberg. Mass hysteria is most often described as an enhanced feeling of fear or panic that is transmitted through a population by either a real or perceived threat. The most common cases that we think of when it comes to mass hysteria tend to be about news reporters giving wrong information and causing people to freak out, or world leaders telling people that they're about to be invaded when they're actually not, etc. However, as we're going to see from this iceberg, mass hysteria is not exclusive to that and also includes things like psychosomatic illnesses. In other words, whenever someone thinks they have an illness and their body begins to show symptoms of it. Hysteria has led to some of the weirdest events in human history, and we're going to talk about some of them today. A couple things of note before we get started. For one, I am going to be using this iceberg pretty much as a guideline. Or in other words, I'm really interested in stories of mass hysteria where there seemed to be a very small or non-existent threat that caused a bunch of people to freak out, rather than like overreaction. For example, the first tier in this iceberg is stuff like Y2K or the Red Scare in the United States and other cases where people just kind of overreacted, and that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the weird stuff. So for that reason, I'm cutting out the first tier and we'll be using the majority of the iceberg while skipping over a few other terms. For example, one of the terms on a later tier is dihydrogen monoxide scares, which is just whenever news reporters said that there was dihydrogen monoxide in the water as a joke and people freaked out. Not really mass hysteria, just people being dumb. And as always on this channel, if I don't think it's interesting and don't think it's worth my time to relay to you, then I'm not going to talk about. However, there is another YouTuber who, in research for this iceberg, I figured out that they followed a slightly revised version of this iceberg to a T, and that is That Dane. I will link his video in the description. He has a ton of really cool icebergs on his channel, and his video over this iceberg was really good, so if you want to know about more of those points I skip over, check him out. I will also be adding some of my personal favorite cases of mass hysteria to this iceberg, because again, I think they're cool. The other thing I want to mention is as this iceberg goes down, we're going to get into some that are related to religious miracles or spiritual experiences, and if at any point in this video you feel that I'm discrediting your beliefs because it's under the label of mass hysteria, I am not saying that I am right and you are wrong. I'm just going with the sort of standard story that science explains it as. That doesn't mean that these can't be supernatural experiences. I'm just talking about the generally accepted ideas. But with all that being said, stick around as we're going to talk about some of the weirdest cases of mass delusion and panic in human history. But first of all, I need to make an announcement. So for starters, let me fix this. Now that's better. I'm excited to announce the new film from writer Evan Royalty and director Stephen Hancock, SCP Heretic. If you're watching this channel right now, then you've probably heard about their previous works. The likes of SCP Dollhouse and SCP Overlord are some of the best movies ever put to YouTube. Not only are they incredibly well shot and edited movies in their own right, but they also serve as a love letter to the SCP community, one of the foundations of internet horror. Their new film, Heretic, is going to be the end of their trilogy and shaping up to be the biggest yet. Evan did a better job at describing the movie than I ever could, so I'm going to leave a link to his video about it in the description. There will be a link to the Heretic Kickstarter in the description. I myself will be donating, and any bit helps. And even if you can't donate, which is totally understandable, just sharing the Kickstarter or the video introduction to Heretic itself will certainly help get the ball rolling. These movies serve as a testament of what can be done by independent creators on this website, which is why I'm so honored to be talking about it now. As a matter of fact, I have a video coming out in the near future about the other films that they have done, so stay tuned for that. But for now, check out Evan's previous videos and check out the links in the description and be on the ground floor of something really amazing. Thank you for listening to this. It certainly is a labor of love, and hopefully you love it at least a little bit as much as I do. So check that out. I hope that you enjoyed, and we are back to the video. Probably, unless this is going in before the ad, in which case here's the ad. But let me stop you right there for a second. Do you smell? No? Well, let me fix that. Because thanks to today's sponsor, you can smell like your favorite or least favorite fragrance, if you're into that sort of thing, with Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that allows you to shop from over 600 designer brands and for only $16 a month, you can have them delivered to your house with no hassle to you. Scentbird delivers up to 3 of your favorite colognes or perfumes to your door thanks to their subscription service, and you can skip the subscription any month you want and pick up right back the month after. They come in these very convenient twist to open cases, and as you can see here, this isn't just a sample size of perfume that you get at the mall, this is an entire month's supply of your favorite fragrance. The products I received this month are the Abercrombie & Fitch Fierce Cologne, the Scents of Wood Vetiver and Oak Cologne, as well as Prada's Luna Rosa Cologne. The Scents of Wood is my favorite out of this batch, mostly because I just enjoy the outdoors and the woods, if you couldn't tell by my everything. But several of these brands that they have to offer are like $500 for a bottle of cologne, but as you can see here, you can get a month's supply for $15. As a matter of fact, this Scents of Wood is $240 a bottle, but thanks to Scentbird, I was able to try it out and see if I want to invest that much money into it or just stay with their subscription service. And even if you don't know what kind of cologne or perfume you like, you can take Scentbird's quizzes on their website and then from there get a feel for what you may want to order for that month. And thanks to Scentbird, today if you go to the link in the description and use discount code Wendigoon3, you can get your first month for 55% off. That's right, for your first month you can have access to any of these designer fragrances for only $7. Scentbird is available in the US and Canada, so if you're in that region, get in on this amazing offer while you can. Again, link in the description, you really don't want to miss out. Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. I hope you enjoyed, check them out, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. There will also be a link to the original Iceberg image in the description as well, and since I'm kind of breaking up the order of it and making it kind of my own, this is my tier 1. The strawberry sugar virus is related to a Portuguese TV show known as Strawberries with Sugar. The show was essentially a teen soap opera that dealt with high school kids and their day-to-day dramas, and for that reason the show was watched by a primarily preteen and child audience. In an episode that aired in May of 2006, the characters in the show began to develop an intense sickness. In the episode, the characters began to develop symptoms such as dizziness, trouble breathing, and rashes over their body. In the following days, across 14 different schools in Portugal, over 300 middle and high school students began to develop dizziness, trouble breathing, and rashes over their body. This caused several schools to temporarily close, believing that a disease was beginning an outbreak. However, other than a few kids who it turned out were just having an allergy attack, none of the children had any disease present in their body. Not only that, but the symptoms were only shown to be in middle school and high school students, meaning that this illness and its physical symptoms are believed to be entirely a case of mass hysteria across several kids in Portugal who just so happened to watch the same episode. The dancing plague of 1518 is probably the most famous case of mass hysteria, and there's good reason for it. In July of 1518 in Strasbourg, a woman only known in history as Frau Trophea began silently dancing in the middle of the town. Over the course of a week, she continued to silently dance in the middle of town, and about 36 people slowly joined her. Bystanders who saw the scene said that the people were not enjoying themselves, and as a matter of fact were very distressed and unable to stop moving. Doctors who showed up at the time, because understanding of medicine was limited at best, said that perhaps they just had really hot blood, because that was a thing that it was believed happened to people, and the best solution was to just dance even faster to get it out of their system. So to encourage more intense dancing, the town had a stage built and brought in musicians to play music, which made the problem a lot worse. With it becoming such a spectacle and now there being a performance at the same time, people began to join in on the dancing and were then unable to stop. This went on for 4 months, tallying up a total of 400 victims, with several of these people breaking their bones, collapsing, and even dying from exhaustion. Finally, in September, several of the men from the town began carrying the people who were still dancing up to the top of a mountain shrine where they were prayed over and assumedly stopped. The people of the time believed that Saint Vitus could curse people to the dancing plague, and some to even dance until they were dead. The historical guesses of the case aren't much better, as the two leading theories are perhaps it was a cult who secretly did this entire thing and danced until they were dead just to prove a point, or possibly a moldy bread that caused people to hallucinate, even though those exact symptoms have never been seen anywhere else in history. With no really good explanation of this case, many chalk it up to mass hysteria. The Hammersmith ghost refers to several sightings of a supposed ghost that would attack bystanders in Hammersmith, London. According to those that believed in the Hammersmith ghost, they said that someone had died in London the year before in 1802 and was not given a proper burial. Because of it, his ghost was attacking the people of the town. The official story was that it was a tall man wearing all white. However, there were several stories of the man having horns or glowing red eyes or wearing these long flowing white robes. Some of the earliest sightings were that of two women who on separate occasions said they ran into the ghost and were so freaked out in the days following that they died of shock. Other people who said they were just walking around Hammersmith said the ghost would run at them from alleys and begin screaming and shouting, and everyone was afraid that the ghost was going to eventually start killing people. Because of this, several night patrols began to form these small mob groups throughout Hammersmith, and at night would patrol the streets trying to catch the ghost. This culminated when Francis Smith was patrolling the streets with a shotgun and saw a bricklayer walking towards him in his all-white uniform. Francis, believing this to be the ghost, quickly said something to the effect of "What are you? Who are you?" before he fired and killed the bricklayer. In the court trial that followed, the bricklayer's wife said that she had told her husband that he needs to cover up his all-white uniform or else one of the mobs will think he's the Hammersmith ghost. Quick side note about that court trial, by the way, it was one of the weirdest in British history because the argument was that he was not guilty by reason of intent, but then the court had this really long argument where they eventually came to the conclusion that intent to kill something is just as good in a murder case as intent to kill the person. And the jury originally returned with a verdict of manslaughter, and the judge said that wasn't allowed because he was either acquitted or meant to kill the bricklayer. So they then gave him first-degree murder, which carried out a sentence of hanging. But then the judge didn't know what to make of that, so he wrote a letter to the king, and the king ended up giving him 1 year of hard labor. So this guy went from manslaughter to first degree to a year of work. It actually reshaped a lot of UK law and wasn't really settled until a 1984 Court of Appeal. Keep in mind all this happened in 1804. Just fun story. During this trial, one man came forward saying that he was the Hammersmith ghost, but he had only ever dressed in a white bedsheet to scare somebody one time and never did it again, implying that perhaps while there was a ghost in the first place, the rest was just complete hysteria that ate up the town and made everyone go crazy. And after this court trial, there were no further sightings of the Hammersmith ghost. Junebug epidemic refers to a case in the 1960s at a textile factory in South Carolina. One day at this factory, the workers opened up a shipment from out of the country, to which whenever they opened it, a Junebug flew out. Later that day, a few workers complained of feeling nausea and dizziness as well as vomiting, and one of them identified having a bug bite on their arm. Connecting it to the aforementioned Junebug, several said that perhaps the Junebug had bit them and transferred some overseas sickness. In the next couple days, 62 people reported the exact same symptoms in the factory of vomiting, nausea, and dizziness, and some even had to be hospitalized. After going through thorough medical checkups, only a few of them had any bug bites on their body, and none of them had any notable diseases in their system. The official story is that patient 0 was bit by a bug, and being worried about the Junebug became ill from worry, to which after that, every subsequent person who became sick was simply sick on their own accord, meaning the Junebug epidemic was a phantom illness falsely blamed on a single Junebug. The 1983 West Bank fainting epidemic occurred on March the 21st of 1983. At a girls' school on the West Bank, 6 girls began coughing and feeling ill, saying that they smelled a foul odor. After this, other girls in the school also began coughing and saying that they could smell an odor as well. Several female soldiers came to escort these girls to a nearby hospital for a checkup, and during the escort, the soldiers reported similar symptoms as well. In all, on the first day, 32 people reported feeling sick, with some even fainting. Because of the intense political climate at the time, many of the nearby news sources began saying that this was a gas attack meant to kill or possibly sterilize the women at the school. Over the next few days throughout the West Bank, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem, people began reporting feeling sick and being poisoned by the poison that was mentioned on the news, with some developing fits of vomiting, rashes, and passing out across all of these cities. At this point, it began affecting both sides of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, so much so that they were declaring open war over it, accusing the other of gassing their citizens. In all, 943 people were hospitalized, and the United Nations had to step in to determine what the cause was. It was determined that perhaps on the first day of all of this at the original school, perhaps there was a gas leak in the walls that caused the girls to become dizzy and feel faint. However, after this, despite 943 hospitalizations, there was no evidence of any gas or true vector of sickness in any cases reported. And the official story is that people were so worried by the events that took place at the school, a psychosomatic illness set in, and their body began developing symptoms that they thought they might acquire. The miracle of the sun occurred on October the 13th of 1917, when 3 local shepherd children said that Mother Mary was going to appear and perform miracles in Fatima, Portugal. According to these 3 children, they had spoken with Mother Mary, and she told them to round people up because she was going to make her power known before humanity. This went on for several weeks and became such a popular story in the region that it's confirmed historically that somewhere between 30 to 40,000 people showed up, with accounts at the time saying it was more than 100,000. According to all of the witnesses that were there that day, the sun began hurling itself down to earth before it stopped, zigzagged back up into place, and began shooting out colors of green, purple, blue, and other fiery apparitions. Many saw this as a legitimate miracle, and as a matter of fact, Pope Pius VII sent cardinals to check out the stories of Fatima, Portugal, and declared it an official canon miracle by the Catholic Church, with official historical records saying that maybe 40,000 people just were dumb and had no clue what they were looking at. I also have to mention that one of the lead scientific theories is that everyone just stared at the sun at the same time and didn't know what happens if you look at the sun, and that's what the miracle was. Just people staring at the sun for 10 minutes and hallucinating a bunch of colors. We are now on to Tier 2, or at least the Tier 2 that I've butchered this iceberg and turned it into. So we don't know the exact year that the Meowing Nuns took place, because a book written in 1844 as part of a medical text described the story as a recollection and happening sometime in the Middle Ages. According to that story, there was a convent of nuns in Central Europe where one day, for seemingly no reason, one girl decided to meow. The other nuns around her, thinking it was funny, joined her in the meowing. This continued to spread until eventually every single nun in the convent would join together for several hours of the day and meow loudly. The people of the nearby neighborhood asked them to stop, to which they would reply with meows, and eventually the town conscripted an army to go to the nuns with whips and threatened to beat them if they didn't stop because it was so annoying. This caused the nuns to stop, and the entire thing is considered mass hysteria in history. However, I like to think that this was just an elaborate troll because that's hilarious. The Halifax slasher was a phenomenon that happened in Halifax, England in November of 1938. It began when 2 women rushed home one night saying that they had been attacked by a man who chased them with a mallet. After this initial story spread across the papers, other women began reporting that they were being chased by somebody, although at first the slasher never gained any victims. Although several women who had cut clothing said that the slasher had chased them and they just managed to get away as he would cut the hem of their clothes. This gave him the name of the Halifax Slasher, and similar to the Hammersmith Ghost, mobs began to be formed in the streets to stop this man who was almost attempting to kill women. This is all well and good up until they started falsely accusing people of being the slasher, because these mobs would be out at night and see like a guy walking alone and be like, there he is, get him, and then like a bunch of people got beat up over that. One guy who was new to Halifax was so berated by people who stood outside of his house chanting for his death that the police had to escort him to and from work. Around the time that it got that intense, several of the women came forward saying that they lied about it and they had actually cut their clothes and they just wanted the attention. And from there, the Halifax Slasher kind of died out, but it's historically remembered as a bunch of people who all got really mad and started beating people up and hunting down a killer when the killer never even existed. Or even if he did exist, never even killed someone. He was just like really bad at being a serial killer. Spring Hill Jack happened in London in 1837. A lot of these are people in like the British London, Halifax area just pretending that something interesting is happening. Anyway, in 1837, a woman claimed that she was attacked by a tall man in an alley who was very handsome and had a devilish laugh. The most striking detail being that the man had claws over his fingers. The next day, a similar looking man jumped in front of a carriage that was going down the street, causing the carriage to steer off the road and careen into a wall. According to onlookers, the man then laughed and leaped over a 9-foot wall to escape. This began the legend of Spring Hill Jack, and several people of London said that he was either a ghost or the devil causing mischief on Earth. The sightings became more and more elaborate, everyone maintaining the idea of him having claws on his hands, but others saying that he had the ability to breathe blue and white fire and had glowing red fire for eyes. The majority of stories were women following men into dark alleys who would then take off their coat and reveal themselves to be a tall, devil-looking figure who would breathe fire and in some cases cause women to die of fright. There were even stories of soldiers seeing a man bound through the woods and over walls some 20 feet tall. Despite all of this, no one in any of the sightings was ever identified, and sightings of Spring Hill Jack went from 1837 all the way to 1904, with spiritualists then and even now believing this to be a demon or the devil himself interacting with people on Earth, or as science says, a case of mass hysteria. The Belgium Coca-Cola crisis occurred in Belgium on June the 8th of 1999. That day at an elementary school in Belgium, 26 children at the same school said that they got headaches and became nauseous after drinking a Coke bottle that they said smelled funny. This story went to the news, and in the following days, hundreds of children all over Belgium also said that they became sick after drinking Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola launched a thorough investigation and found that there was absolutely nothing wrong with any of the drinks that were shipped out. Even examining the specific bottles that the children supposedly got sick on, and the only explanation being, perhaps with the first kids, the bottles were being stored in somewhere that had like a moldy air because it may have smelled a little funny, but there was nothing in the drink or on the bottle itself. And for all the hundreds of kids in the days following, there was absolutely zero explanation. However, Coca-Cola, never having dealt with a crisis like this before, didn't know the golden rule of customer service, which is the customer is always right, and instead made a PR announcement that all of your kids are lying to you, and this is actually a case of mass hysteria, and they're making it up, and you should tell them to shut up. I'm summarizing a little bit, but that was the basic gist. This made parents furious, saying that Coca-Cola was willingly poisoning their children and were now trying to cover it up. Because of this bad PR, over 30 million bottles of Coca-Cola products had to be recalled from Europe, and eventually the president of Coca-Cola was fired. But as stated before, there were no actual diseases or recognizable symptoms, and most people do believe, even if a little harsh, that it was a case of children experiencing hysteria. The Monkey Man of Delhi happened in May of 2001, where several people in New Delhi, India said that they were attacked by a monkey man. More specifically, people said that at night they would be attacked by a 4-foot-tall creature covered in black hair with a metal helmet and metal claws with glowing red eyes and buttons on its chest. They said that it would run at them, begin screaming and hitting them before it would begin leaping over buildings to get away. People in the region lost their minds over this. There began to be riots and protests saying that the government is trying to hide the monkey man from them. Mobs began to form in the streets at night trying to find the monkey man. And in one case, a short, bald monk was walking along the street at night when a mob saw him and nearly beat him to death, thinking him to be the monkey man. Dozens of people said that they had been attacked, and 3 people fell to their deaths when they were standing on buildings and began screaming that the monkey man is chasing them before they jumped off and died. But as you can imagine, no monkey man was ever found, and it's believed that the entire thing was a case of people getting too worked up over nothing. Biting nuns is the slightly more intense version of the meowing nuns thing. So this happened in 15th century Germany at a convent of nuns, and similar to the meowing nuns thing, one nun decided to bite another nun as a joke, to which that nun bit someone else, and like a zombie plague, eventually the entire convent of nuns was just biting each other. This story picked up notoriety as being weird, and messengers delivered it to other convents, to which they began doing the same thing, and eventually convents beginning in Germany and eventually in Holland, Rome, Italy, and the Netherlands all had these castles full of women biting each other. It became such a problem that the Catholic Church began to send out bishops and priests to pray for the convents to get them to stop, and when that didn't work, they began holding exorcisms to get the women to stop biting each other. When that didn't work, they did the thing that the village from the meowing nuns did, where they got a military to come and threaten to whip the nuns, only this time they didn't threaten, they straight up started flogging nuns, and that got everyone to stop. This one to me is more impressive than other cases similar to it, because this wasn't just people doing something as a troll or as a joke. They were performing exorcisms and physically being beat, and they would not quit biting each other. And also, to the credit of the soldiers who beat them, as well as the priests and bishops and all that, I couldn't find any records if this was like a playful bite, like a non-painful thing, or if they were like beginning to rip skin out of random people, because if it was the latter, I also would have held an exorcism. We are now on to Tier 3. The Blackburn faintings occurred in the UK in 1965 when a group of school children were outside waiting for Princess Margaret to show up. Specifically, they were waiting by the Blackburn Cathedral in the middle of the hot sun. After a delayed arrival, which took several hours, several of the children, 140 in fact, passed out due to heat exhaustion. Now, that's all well and good and understandable. However, what's odd is the next day at school, when in perfectly normal conditions, 98 other children passed out as well. And then the next day more did, and the next day more, and eventually by the end of the week, over 300 children who attended the school near Blackburn Cathedral all fainted due to hearing stories of the children who originally fainted. There was no reason given to the faintings after that of the heat exhaustion, and it's believed another psychosomatic disease simply caused these kids to pass out after hearing that their classmates had also passed out. So Irish fright takes a little bit of history to explain. So James II was the King of England in the 1680s. He was generally despised by Protestant England, who felt that he was too violent and willing to kill the people at any time. However, James's daughter Mary was a Protestant herself and was in fact married to a man known as William of Orange. And it was believed that if the country could just wait on him to die, whenever Mary comes to power, everything will be okay. However, tensions were exacerbated whenever James had a son, meaning that there was another heir to the throne he could raise. People began to panic. In the midst of the panic, James, who was trying to maintain his empire, had several Irish soldiers come to the country to maintain order. Legends of these soldiers and their brutality in combat ran throughout Protestant England, and people became increasingly afraid of their presence. On December 9th of 1688, James lost a battle with the Irish army and decided to flee the country while at the same time releasing the army from their conscript. In other words, on December 9th, James and the Irish army left the country. However, while word got around that James had left, a lot of people in England at the time did not know that the Irish army left as well. And with all of the stories of the soldiers' brutality running rampant, many feared that the Irish would strike back and destroy the people as revenge for James leaving. And on December 13th, the true effects of what's known as the Irish Fright began. Reports began to run through the countryside that the Irish, who mind you were no longer in the country, had been burning villages, destroying churches, and slaughtering people en masse. The villages began to panic and erect fortifications as well as arm themselves and wait at the walls of their town for the Irish to come invade. No one really knows where the reports came after this. A lot of people think that maybe it was pro-Mary and William propagandists who started it. But stories started coming in saying that the Irish were burning down London and they were massacring children and that they were vampires and all other means of evil you could imagine. It got so convoluted at one point that Town A would get a message that Town B had been totally destroyed and the Irish are on their way, while at the same time, Town B would get a message that Town A had been destroyed and the Irish were on the way. This went on for several weeks with patrols leaving the towns to be on the lookout for whenever the Irish invade, which led to several awkward interactions where two patrols from different towns would run into each other and be like, "Oh, I thought the Irish got you." And they'd say, "No, I thought they got you." And they'd go, "Man, these guys are so good, we got us and we didn't even know we've been got." Thankfully, there was no stories, at least to my knowledge, of this leading to any massacres or people freaking out and killing other people or whatever. And Mary and William took the throne, and this entire thing is known in history as the Glorious Revolution. So it went surprisingly well for a bunch of scared British people pointing guns at each other. The 2008 Congo football riots. And I emphasize again, like I said at the beginning, I'm not saying this to disrespect anyone's religion or belief, but this is the funniest thing I've read in a long time. On September the 14th, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there was a soccer game to us Americans, but a football game being played between two of the local teams. Near the end of the game, the goalkeeper on the losing team was accused of casting a spell in order to win the game, and they said that that was a penalty and should get him ejected. This quickly turned into a large riot, which whenever police showed up to try to contain the situation, the entire audience began pelting them with stones. The police did not like this and fired tear gas into the crowd, which caused a mass stampede and then several riots within the city over the next several days. Now, I understand this is kind of breaking my rule that I set up at the beginning, that I didn't want to talk about the ones that were just people overreacting to like a single event or a single set of panic. But the reason I want to mention it is supposedly this was a recorded event, which means somewhere out there is a video of a goalkeeper casting a spell on the field and the audience losing their minds because that should be a penalty, followed by everyone pulling out stones that they brought to a soccer game and attacking the police. So I'm putting out a bounty of $500 for anyone who can find me a clip of the goalkeeper casting a spell. And I know I'm not saying this to be offensive at all. I understand I'm not disrespecting anyone's beliefs or anything like that. However, considering it was in the middle of a soccer game and this wasn't like in a church or with sacraments or whatever have you, it was a goalie standing on a soccer field. I just need to know what that looks like. The Mount Pleasant, Mississippi mass drug use, that's a sentence, happened in 1976 at Mount Pleasant, Mississippi, when 15 students passed out in the middle of the school day. The police who showed up assumed that it's because they had all been using drugs and trading them with each other. However, after investigation, All of the students passed clean on their checks, and there were no drugs found in the school. The symptoms of this were rather severe, with several of the 15 students convulsing and throwing up violently over the next several days. These extreme symptoms and no evidence led several parents to think that perhaps whatever drugs were being used were in the air or untraceable, or even some saying that there was a hex going around at the school, which in the coming week made 300 of the 900 student population stay home for fear of whatever was going on. However, to this day, despite the extreme lengths of the symptoms, nothing was ever found, and it seems to be a case of mass delusion. 2007 Boston Moon Night Panic. Like the Congo one, this is technically cheating because it's panic over an event and not like shared delusion or whatever, but I don't care, it's too funny not to mention. On January the 31st of 2007, several LED placards were set up around Boston to promote the new Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie. However, when the Boston police saw these, they assumed that they were IEDs. They shut down roadways, called in bomb squads, had helicopters everywhere, EMT teams, the whole 9 yards. After retrieving one of the IEDs and trying to analyze what the weird symbol on it was, it took hours until a young staffer who was working at the mayor's office saw a picture and said, "Oh, that's the Aqua Teen Hunger Force guy." The sheer absurdity, and the reason I'm including it as mass hysteria, is because of the extreme lengths of stupidity the Boston Police Department went to maintain their dignity in this scenario. If a police department was like, "Oh, we were dumb, my bad guys," I wouldn't think anything of it. But listen to this. During this whole hoopla, they arrested 2 men who were installing one of the placards, and whenever the men told them, "I work for Cartoon Network, this is just an advertising campaign," the police said that they were looking into their alibi. In their official press report, after Cartoon Network had said this was just an advertisement, our bad to the police, in the press report, the police said that they were investigating this because it had circuits, lights, and wires, quote, like a bomb. You know what else has circuits, lights, and wires? A light. They then spent the entire press conference talking about how they'll get to the bottom of whatever intent was given to these devices placed around the city, and that they still believed it could be a IED because it was placed in, quote, high traffic areas. You know what else goes in high traffic areas? Advertisements. They concluded by saying, "We are looking into if this is either a hoax or something else entirely." And then, to this day, they don't refer to it as a bomb scare. They refer to it as a bomb hoax, implying that Cartoon Network tried to threaten the city of Boston. The most frustrating part about it is the police and Homeland Security made Cartoon Network pay out $2 million for damages, or in other words, making them look like an idiot on television. So while not along my definition of mass hysteria as being an unexplainable circumstance in human history, this was too hilarious not to mention, so you're welcome. The face scratcher hysteria happened in northern India in 2002. Several people in villages within North India said that at night a small glowing unidentifiable creature would fly at them before scratching up their face and leaving. Specifically, they said that this creature emanated a red and blue glowing light and moved too fast to get a good view of. People in the village said that up to 7 deaths were caused by this face-scratching creature. The local police who investigated said that they were investigating if it was a, quote, insect that was put together by the government in order to attack and terrorize small villagers. The only official death that occurred during any of this was when a mob of people began attacking a police station, saying that the government was building the face scratchers, to which whenever they broke in the front door of the police station, a police officer fired and killed one of the protesters. And there was reportedly 3 deaths caused by people falling from buildings in the middle of all this panic. I don't know what's happening, since this is the second time that 3 people have died in India from falling off of a building due to a hysteria caused by an impossibly small creature attacking humans that was also blamed on the government and police. There's probably something there, I'm just not getting it right now. And similar to the Monkey Man of Delhi that I mentioned earlier, vigilante groups got together and began patrolling the streets trying to kill the face scratcher. Although, as you can imagine, nothing was ever found, and it's chalked up to just be a huge misunderstanding. We are now on to Tier 4, and I promise you they just keep getting weirder. Puppy pregnancy syndrome, yep, is a delusion that is most often seen in villages around northern India. However, other cases similar to it, if you could call it that, have been reported in some areas of the United States and Europe as well. Pretty much any region that has a lot of traditional folklore and not a lot of modern education or understanding of anatomy. It is the belief that after someone has been bit by a dog, that they are now pregnant with puppies. And while you may be thinking, is this just like a couple absolutely out of their mind people who say this every year? It has been known to affect tens of thousands of people across small villages in the world. These people report that they can see the puppies moving inside of them and can hear them barking. And if you're thinking, is this just women that feel that way? No, men too. And as a matter of fact, it's believed by several of these small villages that it is okay if a woman gets it, but if a man gets it, he will die because he cannot survive the birthing process. The reason I mention it in India specifically is because several of these villages have herbal healers who will give people concoctions of herbs and other things that they say will dissolve the puppies and not, kill them during the process. However, this has historically proven to be incredibly dangerous because the majority of people who are bit by dogs are bit by stray dogs that often have rabies. And many of these healers tell patients that if they accept modern medicine, it will counteract the herbal medicine that got rid of the puppies in them. So hundreds of people have died due to rabies because they will not take modern medicine because they are afraid it will counteract the puppies inside of them. And that's where the danger of puppy pregnancy syndrome comes from. And I want to emphasize again, this is an incredibly small decimal of a percentage of one of the largest countries in the world. However, it is enough of a problem that doctors within India are trying to get education centers and better information out to these groups of people because every year hundreds of people die literally due to ignorance. Well, literally to the rabies, but it's the ignorance that makes it fatal. The Liverpool leprechauns began on June the 30th of 1964 in Liverpool. It started when a young boy ran through the street saying that he had spotted a leprechaun. Over the next several days, other boys said that they had also spotted leprechaun, and this caused several adults to get in on the craze. On the 1st of July, there were such large crowds around the parks in Liverpool that the police had to show up and disperse them as they were way over capacity and kids were destroying bushes and flowers trying to find the leprechauns. And throughout the streets of Liverpool, first aid stations had to be built due to all of the children who were tumbling down hills and hurting themselves trying to look for these leprechauns. It is believed that thousands of people, children and adults alike, were all on the leprechaun hunt for at least a week in Liverpool before the craze spread to other nearby cities, and there were stories of children running amok in churches trying to find leprechauns hidden in the garden outside, or refusing to come to school because they were out on a leprechaun hunt. One man by the name of Brian Jones claimed forward saying that one day he was out gardening in a green outfit and he was pretty short, and a kid said, "Hey, look, a leprechaun." So he yelled some gibberish at him and started dancing and ran away, and he thinks that's what caused everything. But it's nice to think that all of Liverpool was on a leprechaun hunt for a week, and to my knowledge no one died, which for my videos is a pretty good start. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic started on January the 30th of 1962. In an all-girls school in the country that is now Tanzania, 3 girls began laughing uncontrollably for seemingly no reason. Within minutes, this laughter spread to 95 girls in the school. All of the girls were 12 to 18 years old. with some of these laughing fits only lasting a few hours and some lasting up to 16 days. The school was shut down because it wasn't known if some disease or mania was going throughout the students, and then when it was reopened on March the 18th, the laughter started over again. This time it seems to have jumped to another school where 217 girls there also reported laughing fits. I should also mention these laughing fits that went on for days were not a laughing matter, haha, to any of the girls experiencing them. As a matter of fact, several of the girls were crying and screaming and seemed to be in a lot of pain as they could not stop. The hysteria continued to jump from school to school until by the end, 14 schools were affected with over 1,000 girls experiencing uncontrollable and painful fits of laughter. To this day, no explanation is given, and it's just known as one of the most famous cases of mass hysteria. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon happened in Mattoon, Illinois during World War II in 1944. It started when a few people within the town said that they would wake up to a foul odor and being unable to move their legs. This coincided with sightings people had of a tall man suspiciously standing outside of their home, with some saying that he held a flit gun, which is that thing from Looney Tunes cartoons that they would like use to pump smoke or whatever. The symptoms upgraded from just paralysis of the legs to nausea, vomiting, and coughing fits. Over 24 people reported seeing a man outside of their house immediately before experiencing these weird symptoms, with a couple cases even saying that they saw a blue vapor, and one person saying that they got a good look at the man and it was actually a woman dressed as a man. As I mentioned earlier, this took place during World War II, and the historical belief is that everyone was just so paranoid from whatever was going to happen in the war that they just imagined a man coming to their house and trying to poison them, and a lot of people imagined it over the course of several weeks, and they just collectively made it up. The daycare child abuse hysteria was pretty widespread. However, I'm going to focus on what's most likely the most popular case of it. This case began in 1983 at the McMartin Preschool at Manhattan Beach, California. It began when a mother of one of the students at the preschool accused one of the workers of touching her child. Now, what you need to know about this mother is she had had a very long history of falsely accusing other people of doing impossible tasks, and in the same breath that she said this man touched her child, she also said that he would abuse animals and could fly. The police, considering her history of false accusations, were skeptical of her. However, not understanding how this could go wrong, asked the parents to simply ask their children if they thought anything was weird or anything weird had happened. To which all of the preschoolers began to give exceedingly absurd accounts of what happened. It is thought that the stories that I'm about to say were mostly done at the hand of bad social workers who would lead the children into more and more extravagant stories because I guess that's a win in their book. Again, at the suggestion of social workers, the children said that they participated in satanic rituals, the murdering and drinking of babies' blood, that they witnessed witches fly around on broomsticks and cast spells, that they were led into tunnels underneath the school that were non-existent, where mole people lived, and they were also taken up into hot air balloons above LA, and through the course of all of this, they were repeatedly abused. Now, while that may sound like weird for a kid to say, the way that information was actually obtained was a guy sat there and was like, were you abused by the workers at the preschool? And the kid would go, yeah. And he'd go, okay, where? And the kid would go, a hot air balloon? Hot air balloon. With one kid even saying that he was abused by none other than Chuck Norris. This was during the real height of the whole satanic panic thing, and kids were hearing all these stories from parents about how awful witchcraft was and child murder and horror movies and stuff like that. So whenever they were asked by their parents if they knew about these things and they answered yes, you can see where this went. Several of the children even held a story that at the end of every school day, they were all, quote, flushed down the toilets before they would be cleaned up and then presented to their parents. So, logically, we can all chalk this up as one woman told a dumb lie, and now everyone at this school is suffering the consequences because people don't understand how childs work. Well, that would be the case if it wasn't for LA District Attorney Ira Reiner, who was up for re-election, and again, this was at the height of the Satanic Panic, and at this time throughout the country there were other cases of child abuse coming out. So in order to try to get re-elected, she charged the workers of the preschool with 208 counts of child molestation, to which in court the majority of the readings of the cases were absurd things like this child said that he drank baby blood in a hot air balloon, and a jury for some reason had to debate that. The trial lasted 3 years, which again, due to the absurdity and length of the accusations, and is still in American history as the most expensive and long-running trial throughout the entire nation's run, and it ended, thankfully, with 0 convictions and all workers being acquitted. While this is the most popular story, there were several other cases throughout the country where a similar thing happened, in which authorities simply took the advice of the children and other ridiculous things ensued. So I'm going to pin the mass hysteria of this one on the parents and not the children, because the children are children and the parents should know better. Dot syndrome is something known as a culture-bound syndrome. In other words, there are some illnesses or psychosomatic illnesses where a person thinks they're sick but they're actually not, that are only observed in certain cultures around the world. Dot syndrome specifically only being found in South Asia. See, it's a belief within some religious practices in South Asia that you have a series of vital fluids throughout your body, and if you lose any of them, you'll become weaker and could possibly die. One of those vital fluids in men is the fluid that is exclusive to men, if you catch my drift. And to quit cutting corners, Dot syndrome is the belief that semen is escaping within one's urine. Now, this is completely untrue in every case it's reported. There is no disease that causes you to do that, at least not all the time. However, because in South Asia it is viewed as being important, again in some beliefs, to maintain that fluid in your body, that is the only place in the world where people develop the idea that they are losing it for some reason. It's an interesting phenomenon because it gives us such a clear line to trace back to where it comes from, because in that we can see, okay, they care about this thing, which is why it's the only region in the world where this psychosomatic illness pops up at. But if it's so easy to trace the line on that, it implies that other cases of hysteria could have an equally reasonable option for what led them there. And Dot syndrome is seen by many researchers as the framework to truly understanding hysteria and shared delusion. We are now down to the 5th tier, or second to last, on this iceberg. The Hollandwell incident occurred in England's East Midlands in July of 1986. During this time, about 500 children from local schools were there for a band competition. It wasn't particularly hot or anything else that may obviously lead to exhaustion, but for whatever reason, 300 people spontaneously fainted. Upon waking up, which for some of them took several hours, several reported having a sore throat and burning eyes. This also wasn't exclusive to the children, as several of the adults nearby also passed out and experienced these symptoms. It was such a head scratcher at the time that 2 of the lead theories were perhaps a new radio tower nearby caused radio waves to do this to all of these people, or that it was a government silent weapons testing to see if they could spontaneously knock out an entire crowd of people. Either way, the Hollandwell incident is a weird moment in recent history because a bunch of people just passed out and then felt bad, and that was it, and no explanation was ever given. Coro is a culture-bound syndrome, like I mentioned earlier with Dot syndrome. However, this one is a bit more hilarious. So Coro is the name given to vanishing genitalia syndrome and is exclusively seen in males. It is the belief that one's is continuously shrinking and they are powerless to stop it. And this isn't just like a guy thinking that it happened a little bit. This is people who continuously experience this, suffer panic attacks, and regularly make trips to the doctor because they feel like they can't stop whatever's happening. Also, while reading about treatment for it, the primary treatment is a discussion on anatomy with the patient. And the reason this is so funny to me isn't just, haha, man, dumb, think, stupid, whatever. It's because, remember how I said culture-bound syndrome is specifically when one's belief inflicts a paranoid delusion in what they think's happening to their body? Well, this is believed to be the same thing, but it's seen everywhere around the world because in some way, every single culture holds that aspect of the body in high regard. So because of it, everyone experiences the same symptom of thinking that's happening to them, even though it's for completely different reasons, with men in the United States thinking it has something to do with masculinity, people in East Asia thinking it has something to do with religion or stature within one's family, etc. In other words, no matter where you are in the world, it is ingrained in the human psyche enough that everyone thinks it's important, and therefore Koro is seen across the entire Earth's population. I should also mention that Koro means tortoise head, which, yeah, Kateri Malaysia 2019 Screaming Schoolgirls pretty much sums it up. But in 2019 in Malaysia at an all-girls school, one girl said that she felt a sharp pain on her shoulder before she spun around and passed out. While passed out, she said she saw several visions around her of these horrifying locations and, quote, the most terrifying face I've ever seen. She came out of this delirium screaming, to which several other girls in the school also started screaming, although none of them later reported seeing the same vision. This carried throughout the entire school until nearly the entire school's population could not quit screaming. And even after all threat was subsided and they were talking, could not physically quit the convulsions they were having. And while not all of them saw that exact vision, 39 other girls reported seeing other visions of creepy things happening around them. Several religious experts were called in to pray over the girls, and bystanders said that they saw girls kicking and screaming who had to be dragged out of classrooms to keep them from hurting themselves and others. This continued for several hours until exorcists were brought in, who said that the old trees around the school housed evil spirits, and so the trees were cut down. And after several days of prayers and exorcism, all the girls seemingly returned to normal. I mean, most of them were still horribly traumatized with everything that happened, but they quit screaming. The Louisiana twitching epidemic happened at Bellevue, Louisiana in 1939. It began when during a homecoming dance, one girl who was not dancing began experiencing a twitching sensation in her right leg. It was very painful and constant, to which she eventually went to the hospital. The next day, 6 other girls experienced the same twitching sensation in their right leg, to which they also went to the hospital. After thorough examinations and reviews, it was determined that none of the girls were lying, and all of them in fact did have some weird spasm happening in their body. So get how weird this is. After several questions from the doctors, the girl eventually said that her boyfriend was there dancing that night, but she didn't want to dance. While she was watching him dance, another girl began dancing with him, and she got jealous and wanted to, but felt super nervous and sick because she was too nervous and she wanted to go up there and yada yada. That's when the twitching started. It's believed by the doctors that her brain was trying so hard to either make her move or give her a reason to not dance or something, that it just inflicted that pain and sensation in her leg in order to make that happen. Meaning she subconsciously wanted something so bad that her body did the work for her. And that the other cases afterwards were girls either so scared, worried, invested, or whatever that their body did the exact same thing to them. This case of hysteria is unique in that it was observed by doctors for days on end and given several speculations and ideas around. With a lot of cases of hysteria, we can say, oh, that group of people didn't know what they're talking about, or they're just dumb, but this had enough eyes on it to be viewed as something legitimately weird. The other parents thought it was weird too, as for the next several days at the school, children were pulled, thinking that there was some disease happening that made kids twitch their right leg for some reason. And being a textbook case of a psychosomatic illness, the twitching leg incident of Louisiana is still remembered as one of the most definitive cases of mass hysteria. We are now on to the final tier with Tier 6. The Seattle windshield pitting epidemic occurred in Bellingham, Seattle in 1954. In one of the weirdest cases of mass hysteria, a few people in the Bellingham region of Seattle said that they noticed a few holes in the front windshield of their car. The primary idea at the time being that some kid with a BB gun had shot a few of the windshields as a mean joke, and it made enough rounds that it went to the local newspaper. As soon as it was in the newspaper, other people reported that they also had holes in their windshield. From there, everyone began freaking out over holes that they said suddenly appeared in their windshield. People thought it was everything from nuclear testing to sand flea eggs that somehow got implanted inside of glass. And by April the 15th of 1954, 3,000 people had contacted the police saying that they also had a hole in their windshield. This was such a problem, and the mayor was freaking out so much that he called President Eisenhower and asked him to send out the military or investigators to help with whatever's going on. See, what you gotta realize about glass at the time is it wasn't as refined as it is now, and there was a much more common problem with pitting in windshields or small cracks or bumps in the glass. By general estimates, about 95% of the cases were people who had never noticed a hole or chip in their windshield until someone told them that they should probably look for it, and that people began freaking out over something that was always there. Or in other words, people who had been driving a car and maybe when they first got it, they noticed a crack in the bottom right corner of the windshield, and they didn't think about it for a couple years, and then the news goes, do you also have a hole in your windshield? And then they go outside and see it and have a panic attack. I do love the idea that it was so hyped up that the mayor called the president over it to get the military to, I don't know, shoot the kids who were shooting cars with BB guns or whatever. But nothing really quite fits the bill of mass hysteria as much as a bunch of people in Seattle thinking sand fleas were laying eggs in their cars. The Ganesha drinking milk miracle occurred on September the 21st of 1995. At a temple of Ganesha, one of the worshippers had a spoonful of milk it was offering to the statue, which whenever he held the spoon up to the trunk of it, it seemed that the milk was sucked up into the trunk of the statue. Immediately, the worshipper began calling people who tried it out on their statues of Ganesha, and sure enough, the same thing happened. By the end of the day, on September 21st, temples all over the world were lined up with people trying to see if the statue would drink milk for them, with several temples in India boasting lines that took up miles. As a matter of fact, on that day, milk sales in India jumped up 30%. I should also mention that several of the temples kicked people out because they were trying to do stuff like get the statues to drink beer. And while Ganesha wasn't the only one that was reported that day to drink milk, it was the most popular. Now again, if you believe that, more power to you, not trying to discredit you, but the scientific explanation for what was happening then is something known as capillary action. In other words, if you have a sort of vacuum made out of a funnel and you hold something up like a liquid that is malleable, it will travel up that because it's the path of least resistance. It's the same concept of doing something like siphoning gas up a tube, or while not the exact same, whenever you hold your finger on a straw and it goes up the straw, that whole thing. And the idea behind it is that a lot of people just never tried holding liquid up to the statue, which has a hollowed out trunk in the middle, and whenever they held a liquid up to it, the same thing happened and the liquid traveled up the trunk. But similar to the windshield pitting epidemic, even though it was always there, once people were told to look for it, it became a huge hysteric outcry. Those are always my favorite cases with this kind of thing, when it's something that we can look at and simply scoff at, but at the time it was a pretty big deal. And I mean, yeah, if I held up a liquid in front of a statue and it drank it out of my hand, I'd be pretty freaked out too. The Milan poison scare happened in Milan, Italy in the 17th century. During this time, the governor of Milan got a letter from King Philip IV of Spain. In the letter, the king told the governor that there were 4 escaped Frenchmen who were trying to spread the plague through Europe. The governor then told his people, which was a fantastic idea because everyone immediately began to panic. This wasn't helped when on May the 17th of 1629, it seems that someone was playing a prank and put a bunch of water on people's doors so they would think it was infection or whatever. But people were so on edge when that prank happened, they began accusing army generals and even cardinals of the Vatican of doing it to try to spread the illness. And similar to every other case I've talked about, people started to form mobs in the street. They tried to hunt down whoever these 4 Frenchmen could be. There was an old man in a local church who wiped off a bench before he sat down on it, to which a group of women in the church surrounded him and said that he was trying to poison the bench. So they tried to drag him down the street to the essentially sheriff's office. And as they were doing it, they were kicking and punching him. By the time they got to the office, they had beat him to death. And they were like, "Ha! That'll show him." There was one pharmacist in the town who had several chemicals that the people of the town could not immediately identify. I'm sure that means it wasn't a plant in a jar or something. To which the pharmacist was tortured and stabbed on the rack until he confessed to being in league with the devil and several other co-conspirators. So the torturers then rounded up the co-conspirators and tortured them until they admitted that they also worked for the devil and have more co-conspirators, and this kept spiraling until dozens of people were tortured to death for being a part of the devil's plague. I wonder if during this time, that governor who got the letter from the king about the 4 Frenchmen wrote back to the king and was like, "Hey, remember those 4 Frenchmen you warned me about? Don't worry, we found all 67 of them." This hysteria lasted for several months and got to such a point that several people came forward and confessed to being part of the conspiracy to spread the plague, to which they were promptly executed. And then after that, more people, knowing exactly what would happen to them, did the exact same thing because the confusion was so massive, people legitimately convinced themselves that they were a part of it. I'm sure there's something to be said here about fear turning you into the thing you were afraid of and self-fulfilling prophecy, but the video's almost over, so I'm just moving on. And then in one of the wildest cases, at least in my opinion, of mass hysteria is the Lille boarding school. In Lille, France in 1639, there was an all-women Catholic boarding school made to essentially train nuns. The headmaster of the boarding school was not in the best of mind, and one day after walking into a classroom of girls, said that she could see little black devils spinning around all their heads and warned them that the devils are trying to get a hold of them. This continued over the course of several months until eventually every single girl in the school thought about demons and devils, and every class conversation exclusively had to do with concepts like witchcraft, possession, and the like. This began to turn students against each other until everyone was paranoid and convinced that the student next to them was participating in witchcraft. This culminated when one girl tried to run away from the school before she was caught and brought back. Whenever she was brought back and questioned, she said that she had not run away. Instead, the devil had flown in through the window, given her a broomstick for which to fly away with, because she had actually been the witch this entire time, and everything that was happening at the school was her doing. As soon as she said this, another girl came forward and said, no, I'm the witch, and I'm the one who the devil actually wants, before another student did the same, and this continued to snowball until 50 different girls all claimed to be witches in league with the devil himself. They continuously tried to one-up each other in feats as well. While the first girl said that she flew on a broomstick with the devil, another girl said that she had been casting spells and leaving hexes on all the girls in the school, and another girl said that she had a hand in the plague itself. The headmaster, who remember started this whole shebang and was absolutely terrified of witchcrafts and devil, called the Vatican itself, who sent people in to investigate. The members of the church who walk into a boarding house full of women all talking about how they're trying to kill God and cast spells on each other, were mortified. To which they came to the conclusion that the best thing to do was to burn all 50 of the girls in order to make an example out of them. Whenever they asked for approval on this from other members of the church, the other priests were like, maybe don't do that just yet. The specific wording is that they urged the men to further investigate and reconsider before, you burn 50 girls at a stake. And then after not being afraid and actually asking questions, they figured out that all of the girls were very misinformed when it came to the supernatural and didn't really understand proper concepts of exorcism or possession or what have you, and they eventually traced all the lines back to the headmaster of the school. So whenever they figure out that she's actually responsible for everything that's going on, they said, whatever. Legit, they just left. After figuring out that all this had been caused by the headmaster essentially indoctrinating these girls, they just left. I don't even think they took away her position as headmaster. They're just like, oh, you. But the reason this has always been my favorite case of mass hysteria is because you have this group of girls who originally started because they wanted to find God in their life or some higher purpose or what have you, but at the advice of one person who continuously berated them, saying that the devil's going to get them and the devil's out there, it caused them to develop such a sense of paranoia that they didn't know how to exist outside of that paranoia. And then they switched from virtues and morals into evil and being dastardly and the worst they could imagine. It's an entire flip of the human psyche at the suggestion of one person. In actuality, now that I think about it, this is one of the original cults as we think of them today. And it's also hilarious that the guys who show up's like, we have to burn all of the women here. And then someone else said, maybe don't do that. And they're like, oh, all right. I guess we'll just leave. And it's so interesting to me because it's one kind of mass hysteria with group thought under one guide alongside another mass hysteria of community thought and fear in the face of the unknown. And they seem to be two sides of the same coin, with that coin kind of being representative of how spiritualism was viewed at the time. And stories like that are always so interesting to me, not only because of how they apply to history as a whole, but just as these little pockets of information for how people can work whenever in this certain scenario. And I don't know, I've just always thought it's kind of neat. And hopefully you thought it's kind of neat, and hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I just want to say thank you for watching. This is the first video that I've started full production of, over 1 million subscribers, and that is so weird to think about. I think I'm at like 1.03 now. Like, since the MLK video came out, it's been another 30,000 people. That's absurd. You guys are so kind to me. You're way too good to me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this. I really do appreciate it. The MLK video is doing fantastic, which I'm really happy to see. That is the most satisfied I've been with a video in a while. Like, after I sat down and like rewatched the whole thing after I was done editing it, I was very happy with how it turned out. You all seem to enjoy it, which I really appreciate. Thank you. And I think right now, like at the time I'm talking, it has about 500,000 views, which is really crazy. If you have told me like a year ago that talking about conspiracy theories could get 500,000 views, I would have thought you were crazy. But I'm so honored. Like, if you tell me that right now, I still think you're crazy because I can't believe it. But I'm so honored, and thank you all for watching that. I hope you enjoy it. But yeah, I really loved that video. I'm happy that it's doing well, so thank you guys for that. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. I always love topics like mass hysteria, just weird things in history. I think I mentioned I would cover this on my conspiracy theory tier list. So here that is. I will be doing more of the videos that I mentioned I'll do. I'll actually like keep promises on that stuff. I'm trying to think what else for now. There's some news coming up for the patrons soon. I'll be making a video on that. You may actually see that before this. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but it'll be around the same time. I'm trying to think what else. Oh yeah, at the beginning of the video, that ad for SCP Heretic, get in on that. I am so excited to see where this goes, where this project goes. The best advertisement for Heretic is the other movies that they've done. And I absolutely love them. I think this is going to be great. I'm so excited for it. he's already announced some of the actors that are going to be in it, and they're fantastic talent, and I'm pumped. So hopefully you are too. Hopefully you enjoy that. Again, link in the description. Check them out. They definitely deserve it. They're good people too. They're cool guys. I'm trying to think what else. I think that should do it. So thank you to all of my subscribers. Thank you to my patrons here. Thank you to my top tier patrons, as you see, supporting the boy, allowing me to get to this point. It's more than I could ever imagine or think, and you guys are fantastic. So thank you for this continued support, allowing me to be here. It means the most. Again, thank you to my subscribers. Thank you to everyone for watching. You guys are great. I'm trying to think announcement-wise. Oh, I was on the PKA podcast, the Painkiller Already podcast, which I guess some of you have seen, considering it's pretty popular. And I had a great time doing that. I was also on the Half Baked podcast. At the time I'm recording, that's not out yet, but it should be out fairly soon. It's cool getting to talk to all these creators I've admired for years and love their stuff, and I get to talk to them kind of as an equal in a way, and that's really wild. And it's thanks to you guys for putting me in that position, so thank you very much. But I believe that should do it for now. New videos coming up on the way, so stay tuned for that. There will be the supercut of the Conspiracy Iceberg soon, as well as the 1 million thank you whenever my gold plaque comes in to set next to that one. But I believe that should do it for now. So, as always, I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!